Now, in addition to the management fee, we found that the nonprofit gave more than $2 million worth of bonuses, mostly in fiscal year 23, and spent tens of thousands more on food, entertainment, and other gifts. On the screen are the total number of tax dollars that the nonprofit has taken as a management fee or expended for bonuses, gifts, and food from 2021 to 2023. For 3 years now, we've also reported that the nonprofit redirected emergency rental assistance to Afghan refugees. From 2021 to 2023, OMES allowed the nonprofit to spend more than $9 million resettling Afghan refugees in Oklahoma.
So, Cindy Byrd.
I'm going to scoot this over here just a little bit. I want to make sure everyone can see the screen. You'll want to. You want to look at it instead of me. But good evening. It's wonderful to be back at the 912 Club. And I always appreciate the invitation to get to come and talk about it. I do have Melissa Capps with me today. She's the director of the Performance Audit Division, and she's also been very instrumental on some of these investigative audits. So if the questions get really tough between the two of us, we're going to be able to answer your questions. Melissa's been responsible again for some of the most important audits over the last few years, including a first-of-its-kind audit of Medicaid eligibility in Oklahoma. Over the course of the last year, both at the federal level and right here in Oklahoma, we've all been hearing a lot about government efficiency. And when I hear DOGE, all I can think is, hey, we government auditors were DOGE before DOGE was cool. But I have to say, when it comes to making taxpayers work for the American people, you can't have too many hands on deck. Yet, despite Elon's best efforts, the national debt is now more than $38 trillion. Unfortunately, the time to address this issue was 10 years ago when Dr. Coburn was warning us about the $18 trillion in federal debt we had back in 2015. Well, now that number has doubled. But some lawmakers in Washington would rather shut down government than find a way to address the root of the problem. As frustrating as the events in Washington can be, the truth is America's debt time bomb is never going to be fixed from the top down. Billions of federal dollars pour through the state agencies every year, and ultimately only the states can clean up their own wasteful spending. And even though all 77 counties voted for Trump in 2024, Oklahoma state officials still need to put our financial house in order. I'm talking about potentially billions in improper Medicaid payments at the state level, tens of millions spent on DEI or other questionable education initiatives at the local level, and hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency pandemic relief that was either mismanaged or abused. We've been reporting on these issues for years, and now President Trump is taking them to the national level. In June 2025, President Trump instructed the Department of Health and Human Services to clean up Medicaid after the national DOGE found significant abuse. However, way back in 2019, my first year in office, we reported that Oklahoma paid more than $1.6 billion to Medicaid recipients whose income had never been verified. And we confirmed that the state paid at least $30 million to recipients who did not qualify for those benefits. Melissa Capps was the director who led the team that brought these serious issues to light. By the way, roughly 1 in 4 Oklahomans are enrolled in Medicaid. Neither the federal government nor the state can afford to sustain Medicaid at its current level. In 2019, we gave the Oklahoma Health Care Authority, which administers Medicaid in the state of Oklahoma, very clear guidelines on how to fix the situation. However, under the Biden administration, the agency was forbidden from removing anyone from the Medicaid enrollment, which only perpetuated the problems that we identified in the audit. Now, speaking of education, on February 27th of last year, Trump's Department of Education launched an online End DEI portal. which the public can use to report instances of racial or sexual discrimination in public schools related to DEI practices. We released our report on Tulsa Public Schools the day before Trump's portal launched. And as you know, we found at least 35 million and likely more than 75 million had been spent on DEI initiatives under the former superintendent at a time when less than 7% of the students were testing at grade level. Now, our audit of Tulsa Public Schools was the first of its kind to examine DEI spending in an independent school district. When I took office way back in 2019, I could have never imagined that education audits would occupy so much of my time. However, after uncovering the largest misappropriation scheme in the history of the state at Epic Charter Schools, I quickly learned just how hard it was to question education spending in this state. The two founders of Epic, just to remind you, siphoned more than 214 million taxpayer dollars away from the school and into a consulting company and a learning fund under their control. Instead of providing the management services they claimed justified their fee, the founders used that money to enrich themselves, hire the best attorneys money could buy, and establish a slush fund for political donations. They even poured millions of dollars of dark money into a PAC designed to discredit my audit and prevent my reelection back in 2022. Now, I have to say, I never anticipated the political opposition I received as a result of the Epic audit. But like any good CPA, I rose to the occasion. Now, I always say whenever Netflix buys the rights to the Epic audit story, I want Sandra Bullock to play my part. Now, Epic founders are now facing 15 felony counts, including racketeering, money laundering, and embezzlement. And what about the pandemic relief in Oklahoma? Well, all the way back in December of 2020, Trump warned Congress that its $2.3 trillion COVID relief package was full of wasteful and unnecessary provisions that would not support Americans who were struggling to make ends meet under the mandated lockdowns. Since then, year after year, we've reported on the ways in which federal pandemic relief has been abused in Oklahoma. We found that $6.5 million in tuition assistance was denied to qualifying families after certain schools and parents were granted special access to the money. $1.8 million that was reserved for educational supplies had actually been used to buy personal TVs, grills, deep fryers, and smokers. $9 million in emergency rental assistance was redirected to Afghan refugees resettled in this state by nonprofits like Catholic Charities. And most recently, we reported that more than $51 million set aside to assist Oklahomans with child care needs during the pandemic had been mismanaged, wasted, and exploited by bad actors. We reported on these child care findings in September, almost 4 months before Nick Shirley broke the news about Somali daycare fraud in Minnesota. Now that story is national news, but we've been trying to draw attention to a similar problem in Oklahoma for months now. Like you, as a taxpayer, I'm deeply frustrated by our state's failure to act quickly and put common sense procedures in place that will protect your taxpayer dollars. The Office of State Auditor and Inspector is a reporting agency. Our mission is to provide transparency so that taxpayers know what's happening to their money and financial guidance so that public officials can become better stewards of tax dollars. Every time we issue an audit report, we provide concrete action items so that state agencies, counties, municipalities, or school districts can protect public assets. Unfortunately, our advice is often ignored. We do not have the legal authority to hold bad actors accountable. That's the responsibility of other elected officials. And even when it comes to lobbying legislators, my hands are often tied. In a well-meaning effort to conserve public funds, Governor Stitt signed an executive order in 2019 forbidding state agencies from hiring lobbyists. I agree with that, by the way. But what I've found out over the years is the only real way to get the attention of public officials is to take my reports to the people so that taxpayers like you, empowered with the facts, can demand actions from your public servants. I'm asking you to take to heart what I'm going to say this evening, and just like you did after the Tulsa Public Schools audit, make your voices heard. Tell your state senators and representatives that 2026 is the year that Oklahoma must put its financial house in order and do its part to ease the debt crisis in this nation. One of the reasons that our country is $38 trillion in debt is due to a massive surge in federal spending, which originally came as a response to the pandemic, but which continues to this day. In Oklahoma, spending doubled overnight, going from around $7 billion in federal expenditures each year to roughly $14 billion each year. Since 2020, we have audited more than $44.7 billion of the total federal dollars spent in this state. Federal money always comes with strings attached, and the U.S. government mandates that I audit all federal grants over a certain threshold according to a specific formula. Now, I release these findings every year in the federal single audit report, and this audit is to ensure that federal grant money is spent in compliance with federal guidelines. In many instances, Oklahoma has not been spending money in compliance with the federal guidelines. Any expenditures that do not comply with federal statutes, regulations, terms, or conditions, or cannot be traced by receipts or other substantiating documentation, or if it appears unreasonable or improper, that's considered questioned cost. And the reason why this is so important is that the federal government can demand a refund from the state of Oklahoma for every dollar of questioned cost. For expenditures dating to the fiscal year 2023, questioned costs totaled $93.4 million. And just to put this into perspective, before the pandemic, Oklahoma's questioned costs routinely averaged around $5 million a year. After the pandemic, the average has been closer to $30 million per year. So while we've seen a substantial rise in question cost ever since COVID, $93.4 million is an unprecedented number. Now I'm going to walk through the most significant question costs, which are tied to just two state agencies, OMES, the Office of Management and Enterprise Services, and Oklahoma DHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. At OMES, continued mismanagement of emergency rental assistance led to $21.8 million in question cost. While at DHS, we will unpack $63.6 million in question cost, most of which come from mismanaged child care development funds. Now, with regard to OMES's question cost, the feds are now taking steps to hold Oklahoma accountable. In April, the U.S. Treasury directed the state to repay $1.6 million in question cost from fiscal year 21. The demand for a refund is directly tied to the amount that a local nonprofit retained as an unallowable management fee during the administration of the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance Program. I'm going to call that the ERA program. The nonprofit was originally one of two tasked with administering rental assistance across Oklahoma. OMES awarded this nonprofit a no-bid contract and a bulk of the ERA funds. Federal regulations required OMES to competitively bid federal grants. That helps ensure that only the most qualified candidates who will provide the best service for the best price receive the contract. Well, OMES decided not to enforce this procedure, which enabled a nonprofit to administer more than $343 million of our tax money as emergency rental assistance. ERA funds were originally set aside to offset rent and utility costs for those Oklahomans who were impacted by COVID. In the process of distributing aid, OMES allowed the nonprofit to collect more than $15 million tax dollars as a management fee. OMES does not seem to have had any questions seemed to have not asked any questions when the nonprofit reported this unallowed fee as an administrative cost. And as most of you know, administrative costs are simply the overhead expenditures required for the nonprofit to run the ERA program, and it includes things like payroll. The feds had very clear guidelines for administrative cost. The nonprofit could only retain grant funds for actual operating expenses related to ERA, and each expenditure had to be backed up by receipts, invoices, or some other proof of the expenditure. Now, normally under these conditions, a state agency would reimburse the vendor for its actual cost only, ensuring that no tax money was used for unallowed administrative cost. However, OMES decided to just advance lump sum payments, and in fiscal year 21-22, the amount that OMES provided was well in excess of what that nonprofit needed to run the ERA program. OMES made no attempt to recover the excess money and return it to the feds as the grant required. Meanwhile, the nonprofit was allowed to retain the money and call it a management fee. In effect, it appears as though OMES allowed the nonprofit to levy a surcharge on taxpayers. Without any invoices or other documents to justify these costs under the terms of the grant, we had no choice but to question the entire management fee. By the end of fiscal year 2022, the management fee had already exceeded $10 million. And in fiscal year 23, the nonprofit retained another $5.5 million in management fees, leading to a total of $15.7 million. Now, I issued multiple warnings to OMES about this situation. In July of 2023, I sat down with the nonprofit's former executive director and told her that the management fee was not allowed. However, a director at OMES appears to have given the nonprofit different instructions. All indications are the nonprofit continued to collect the management fee, and at least one individual at OMES seems to have encouraged it. Meanwhile, other administrators at OMES did nothing to correct the situation, despite our repeated warnings, and the management fee steadily rose to that $15.7 million. Now, given that the feds have already asked for $1.6 million back, which corresponds to the amount of management fees collected in 2021, it stands to reason that they're eventually going to demand reimbursement for the entire management fee. That means the state is potentially liable to pay back at least $15.7 million to the federal government. It's not the nonprofit paying back the $15.7 million. We, the taxpayers of Oklahoma, are paying back the $15.7. Now, in addition to the management fee, we found that the nonprofit gave more than $2 million worth of bonuses, mostly in fiscal year 23, and spent tens of thousands more on food, entertainment, and other gifts. On the screen are the total number of tax dollars that the nonprofit has taken as a management fee or expended for bonuses, gifts, and food from 2021 to 2023. For 3 years now, we've also reported that the nonprofit redirected emergency rental assistance to Afghan refugees. From 2021 to 2023, OMES allowed the nonprofit to spend more than $9 million resettling Afghan refugees in Oklahoma. The state had separate federal funds specifically reserved for refugees available at DHS. And to be eligible for the ERA grant, applicants had to owe rent in Oklahoma at the time of the application. Now, the nonprofit's own application for rental assistance stated that in order to qualify, an individual had to be an existing resident. However, the nonprofit waived the application requirement for many refugees. The nonprofit also reported spending another $11 million for operations in 2023, but the nonprofit never provided receipts, invoices, or other evidence that would allow us to confirm the legitimacy of those expenditures. No one knows where that money went. I also want to point out the nonprofit was allowed to collect interest on any grant funds it was holding, which potentially enabled the nonprofit to generate revenue out of the ERA program. We don't know how much the nonprofit collected on interest, but we are potentially talking about several $million. And if OMES had reimbursed the nonprofit for administrative fees rather than advancing lump sum payments, That is interest the state would have generated for itself, just like we have with the ARPA funds. Instead, the state's potentially liable to pay back $15.7 million for the management fee. And furthermore, if OMES had provided proper oversight of these ERA funds, then more than 7,600 additional Oklahoma households may have received the rental assistance that they needed. Sadly, in terms of dollars and cents, OMES does not have the largest amount of question cost in that year's single audit. You'll notice that the largest amount of question cost pertains to the Oklahoma Department of Human Services. $63.6 million in question cost can be traced to the agency for fiscal year 23 alone. The vast majority of this amount derives from the agency's mismanagement of a COVID-era block grant for daycares. Since March of 2020, DHS has received $791 million under the umbrella of the Federal Child Care Development Grant. One of the primary purposes of the grant was to help child care facilities cover normal operating expenses like payroll and rent during the pandemic. The grant also allowed DHS to create a unique supplemental program tailored to child care needs in our state. Now, during interviews, we were told that 4 people at DHS, the former agency director, his chief of staff, the former CFO, and the former director of child care services decided how all of that money was going to be spent. The federal government sent this money to the states and gave great leeway to the states in terms of how they deployed it. DHS did not put strong guidelines on how the daycares were to use the funds, nor did it conduct any financial monitoring of child care development. As a result, bad actors were able to game the system at the taxpayers' expense. One recipient who operated a daycare out of their private home used the money to install granite countertops in their kitchen. In fact, there were several instances of home daycares taking child care development funds and using them for lavish bath or kitchen remodels, some costing between $30,000 and $40,000. Now, another recipient spent $20,000 to pay off a Cadillac. Now, we intended to question those expenditures. However, when we expressed our concerns to the federal government, they said that almost any purchases, even those that appear unnecessary or wasteful, would be permitted as long as it could be construed as having a remote connection to child care. A Cadillac, they said, could be used for transportation. So per the federal government's advice, we did not question granite countertops or Cadillacs, and that's not included in that total. But because I don't like waste and abuse, we're telling you about it. Now, there's no better example of DHS's financial mismanagement of child care development than the Child Care Desert Grant Program, an initiative meant to expand access to child care in counties that could not meet the demand. In theory, the program would provide crucial startup money for new daycares or expanding existing daycares to cover things like minor construction projects. In practice, a child care facility could get up to $5,000 per child as a lump sum payment based on their potential capacity for enrollment, which was based entirely on square footage. For the Child Care Desert Grant Program, we ultimately had to question 75% of the expenditures included in our test sample. We also found evidence of misappropriation of funds in 10% of the facilities tested. The single largest distribution of Desert Grant funds was to one of the co-founders of a curriculum company. To maintain anonymity with regard to an ongoing investigation, I'm going to refer to this individual as Applicant 1. Applicant 1 is married to the former Director of Child Care Services at DHS. She is one of the 4 individuals who helped structure all of the child care development initiatives, and she would have had access and final authority over her husband's company's application. Now, despite this glaring conflict of interest, DHS advanced more than $2 million to Applicant 1. Applicant 1 did not operate a daycare. He ran an after-school program out of 2 schools, both of which allowed him to utilize their facilities at no charge. At one site in Oklahoma City, DHS determined that applicant 1 could accommodate up to 283 children based on the square footage. And he was approved to receive a $1.4 million distribution for that location specifically. A DHS employee noticed the number was too high, recalculated the square footage, which affected enrollment capacity, and determined that applicant 1 should receive a smaller amount of money. However, weeks later, someone at DHS approved applicant 1 for payment at the original capacity of 283 kids, and he received a distribution of $1.4 million. But that's a significant overpayment. There are only a few people at DHS who had the authority to override the revised payment, and the Director of Child Care Services, applicant 1's wife, was one of them. Furthermore, there is strong evidence that applicant 1's program was not set up to serve anywhere near 283 children. According to DHS's safety checks at the Oklahoma City location, on any given day, only 10 to 12 students attended applicant 1's after-school program. As of February 2025, applicant 1 had spent around $1.3 million of the $2 million he originally received. Now, according to the report applicant 1 submitted to my auditors, 93% of the program's total expenditures went to payroll and administrative costs, both of which were not allowed under the Desert program. The school received no portion of these funds. Of that $1.3 million in total expenditures, the 3 founders of the curriculum company split more than $815,000 among themselves. At least 60% of the after-school program's expenditures went to the co-founders. And by the way, in an interview, applicant 1 also clarified that the after-school programs will not continue once the Desert grant funds run out. By the terms of the grant, applicant 1 did not qualify for these funds. However, the former director of DHS and his team seemed to have made no attempt to provide any oversight that would protect taxpayer dollars. And despite the state spending $43 million tax dollars on the Child Care Desert program in 2023, enrollment capacity in desert counties increased by less than 2% from 23 to 24. Even worse, we saw a net decrease of 14 child care facilities in desert counties. As of 2024, 27 of 34 counties saw either a decrease or no change in the total enrollment capacity, the number of facilities available, or both. And our test sample reveals a similar pattern. At least 20 Desert grant recipients have permanently closed their doors. That alone amounts to $2 million that did not support the expansion of child care in our desert counties. Unfortunately, the Child Care Desert program is not the only missed opportunity we uncovered within the purview of the Child Care Development Funds. DHS handed out more than $27.1 million to child care facilities that applied for a new rating under its revised Quality Rating and Improvement System, QRIS, and it was nicknamed STARS. The handout was theoretically an incentive to improve quality of care, and DHS gave away anywhere from $2,500 for a 1-star daycare to $15,000 for a 5-star facility. In every case, they simply awarded a child care provider based on the number of stars that the provider had requested in the application. Now, it's important to note that the number of stars a daycare has affects the amount of federal subsidies they receive per child. And based on interviews with DHS employees, we learned that there had been no site visits, no rigorous evaluation of credentials, and few safeguards for taxpayers' money. Some facilities were elevated to 5 stars, even though they had a track record of less than perfect assessments from the previous years. Furthermore, DHS waived follow-up of evaluations for the subsequent year. That means the daycares could maintain the same 5-star rating and collect normal federal subsidies at a higher rate without undergoing a proper review of eligibility. Now, to be clear, it would have been impossible for most daycares to implement all the changes necessary to maintain their new rating long-term within the time allotted. To do so, daycares would have had to obtain national accreditation, itself a costly investment, and hire licensed instructors as well as individuals with master's degrees. Very few recipients were in a position to meet these criteria within 1 year's time. It is unclear whether DHS understood just how difficult it would be for some recipients to make these changes. Nonetheless, once DHS began conducting inspections again, many facilities lost their 5-star ratings. Some were bumped even lower. That means those daycares will receive a lower federal subsidy rate going forward, and many have said they cannot keep their doors open unless they maintain the current level of funding. That means those daycares became dependent on government money that they should never have received in the first place. And now their business is in danger of folding, partly because DHS administrators did not provide proper guidance and communication about what was expected going forward. Now, furthermore, the STARS program cast doubts on the reliability of the daycare ratings. That's unfair to facilities that meet all of the requirements. But perhaps most importantly, it's a huge disservice to parents who rely on DHS to evaluate daycares accurately and hold them to high standards. The whole reason that we have these rating systems is so that parents can accurately evaluate daycares when they are searching for child care solutions. Now, when parents cannot find quality child care, they may not be able to work. They may have no choice but to apply for government benefits, which is an expense taxpayers will have to cover. At the end of the day, DHS did not provide the oversight needed to ensure that the federal funds had the maximum impact across the state. And keep in mind that the Child Care Desert and STARS were just two of the programs contributing to DHS's total question cost of $63.6 million. What the federal single audit for 23 demonstrates is that the state has not done its best to ensure that your tax dollars provide a maximum benefit for Oklahoma and its people. What we found time and time again was that Oklahomans were denied services even when they qualified for them because grant money had been abused. Now, my job is to report the facts and the numbers. Facts and numbers don't lie. And the truth is, I'm very concerned about the future of our state and our country. You've heard me talk about the national debt. We are approaching $39 trillion. We added another $1 trillion to the debt in just 3.5 months. We cannot keep going down this road without consequences. And when cuts come at the federal level, Oklahomans need to be ready to deploy these dollars more efficiently and effectively to benefit all Oklahomans. I truly believe that Oklahoma has incredible potential. We could be the major engine of growth that propels the nation into a better future. But we will miss that opportunity if state officials do not utilize tax dollars more responsibly. On the other hand, if the mismanagement continues, your state taxes could go up, your federal taxes could go up, and government services will plummet. Together, those factors could choke economic growth. As state auditor, I do not have the legal authority to hold bad actors accountable or enforce changes within other state agencies. But as a frustrated citizen, I hope you will join me in calling for a new era of fiscal responsibility in the state of Oklahoma. After all, there is no such thing as government funded. It is our money. And the good news is, leave you on a high note, there is a solution to much of what we've just covered tonight. If we can conserve federal dollars as well as state resources, then we will be able to lower taxes and improve core services at the same time. If we can do that, then I believe that we will incentivize strong entrepreneurship and sustainable growth for generations to come. Thank you for letting me present to you tonight. And Rhonda, are we allowed to have questions?
Yes, but I want to start off.
I guess that's your prerogative.
Well, we know that your term limited, and we've got a little bit of time, and we understand that you are running for lieutenant governor. And I think it would be important to share with people why you think you are the candidate for lieutenant governor.
Okay, I'll take just a few minutes and tell you that. I am a fourth generation Oklahoma. I'm a rural girl. I really care about this state. I care about living in a place where we have conservative values and where we admire and reward hard work. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because I know I have a unique set of skills. I will have 30 years of experience looking at all of the financial levels of government, from the federal funds that come into our state, to what's done at our state level, to what's spent in our county government, to our school districts, and to our cities and towns. Not many people get that full view of things. I have two things that I want to do as Lieutenant Governor: promote Oklahoma and make Oklahoma affordable. I'm going to start with making Oklahoma affordable. We have seen property taxes skyrocket. I believe that we can limit these skyrocketing property taxes in several ways. Oklahoma, this should not be a factor in whether or not someone gets to stay in their home. And when you couple that with the increases in insurance cost, Oklahoma housing is becoming a serious issue. At the national level, we have seen such an abuse of entitlement programs. Whenever those entitlement programs grow and grow because of the abuse, it cuts out funding for other core missions of government, like funding infrastructure, public safety, and education. We've got to make sure that we are providing for the mental health issues in this state. We've got to make sure that we're providing for the issues that we're seeing in our county jails that are ending up on your property taxes. We know that affordability starts with accountability, and we've seen the conflicts of interest. I've shown you a few today, the self-dealing from some state officials. That abuse has got to stop, and I am the unique person in this race who can help stop the abuse. Now then, all of that's the serious side. My good friend, Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell, reminded me the other day, the Lieutenant Governor's role is a blank canvas, and each Lieutenant Governor gets to decide their focus. I believe Matt Pinnell has been one of the greatest Lieutenant Governors ever, and I love what he's done. He stood strong, and he's just a darn nice guy. But somebody needs to continue and build on what he has built, and I will also make that part of my platform. There are things that we need to do, like encouraging our existing businesses, those that share our common values here in Oklahoma. We need to take care of them and help them expand before we're offering incentives to out-of-state companies that will maybe bring in people who don't share our values. We need to continue to promote tourism. In Oklahoma, our budget for tourism marketing is so much lower than all of our surrounding states, and we are missing opportunities. We have got to champion legislators to raise that budget enough that we can compete with other states. Oklahoma is a beautiful state that can still provide affordable vacations for families. That's at the top of my list. Visitors come in whenever we have events or attractions, and they spend money. They buy goods and services from our businesses, and then the sales tax that's generated from that support our cities and towns. It's a very important ecosystem that we have to look at all things, and we have to encourage that, especially in our rural counties. I'll quickly tell you a story. Whenever I was in college, I worked at a Wrangler jeans factory to put myself through college. And as soon as I graduated, President Clinton signed NAFTA. That was the North American Free Trade Agreement. And the minute he signed it, in my little town of 2,000 people, 300 jobs were lost. My Main Street has never recovered, and that's been 30 years ago. Those are the kinds of things that I understand that federal policy can affect your Main Street, and we've got to guard against some of that. And then also, as long as Oklahoma is ranked near last in education and health outcomes, it's going to be hard for even our existing businesses to want to expand. It is time for us to make those things a priority. And in my tenure as state auditor, I've been tasked to lead I believe the hardest audits, and I can get the prior state auditor to confirm that. But I've had to do the deep dive into 2 of the largest school districts, as well as looking at some of the audits in our healthcare agencies. There are so many efficiencies that can be found that can help improve our outcomes. And we've got to start seriously looking at mental health and how that is affecting. And I'm going to say this one more time because it's a very big thing for you to understand. Whenever we're not taking care of mental health issues, and these people end up in your county jails, and there is an accident and there is a lawsuit, that lawsuit is required by law to be paid out by raising your property taxes over a 3-year period. All of these things are interconnected, and you've got to know how the system works in order to make it better. I believe in Oklahoma. These are not costly fixes to help Oklahoma move forward. There are real things we can do in the first 90 days that would help you and help your pocketbook. So I leave you with hope and optimism that Oklahoma will be better, that we will solve some of these problems, and that we will put our Oklahoma citizens first. And I guess that was a lot, Rhonda, but I will tell you.
Does anybody else have questions? Hang on a second. I'm going to bring you a microphone. It's not to project your voice, it's for video only.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, these revelations that you shared tonight discourage me. But I want to know, how is it that you recommend, A, that ordinary citizens do get involved and make a difference? And I heard, of course, contacting state legislators, but are there any other grassroots citizen groups you know of? And because I'm going to yield this and never see this mic again. The second thing is, in your new office as Lieutenant Governor, how well aligned is that office and its limitations to your being able to light a fire for enforcement, to make good, ultimate good out of all the things that your work as auditor has revealed? And thank you for that work.
Okay. Thank you. First question is, let me table the first question. The second question. Whenever you look at what the Lieutenant Governor does now with tourism, and again, I want to say he's done an excellent job, but the only thing in Constitution or statute that gives him the authority to work on tourism, he sits as the chair on an advisory commission only, and he uses his strong voice of influence and the respect that people have to steer and make those decisions. So I too would have that voice of influence and the knowledge and experience of 30 years to work with the leaders down at the Capitol, not against them. We need to all be rowing in the same direction to bring some of these things to light and help them understand how very cheaply we could implement some of these measures to take better care of you. So I would definitely use my experience and my voice to do that. Now back to how you could get involved. You know, I see the social media wars, and I see the constant calling out, and it's turned into something that is just a loud roaring with no real solution. And so I would encourage you, one of you, if you've listened to this and you feel like you understand it, to go and visit with your representative or senator. Ask them if they have read this audit. Ask them if they've come to visit my office and ask for more information, because my office is open to everyone, and we want to work with someone and with you all to help get these things solved. But it comes with passing responsible legislation that really fixes the problem, not just one that gets a soundbite for 10 seconds in the news.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Oh, Larry, sorry. I'm done.
If you'll put your auditor's hat back on. Set against the backdrop of Tulsa Public Schools' reputation it's developed for stewardship with its finances, it's now asking its taxpayers to let it borrow another $609 million by passage of a school bond issue on April the 7th. And this creates a real urgency for the need for the release of your addendum to your TPS audit. And so with that in mind, Bob, Jack, and I have locked the doors to this room, and we're not going to let anybody out until you please tell us, if you can at all, please tell us when we can expect to have the release of that addendum for the TPS audit.
Okay, well, I knew I would get asked that question, and I will say this. We do not discuss the results of an audit until the audit is final, because we may have a piece of evidence in front of us today that believes us to conclude in this way, and we may be given different evidence tomorrow that would make the situation okay. That's the short answer on giving out answers in the middle of an audit. The next thing to think about is I don't have full subpoena power. So every time I need additional documentation on any audit that involves outside parties, I have to go before the multi-county grand jury, which meets once a month. We are scheduled to ask for some information. When we get that information, After we review that and look through it, we may have to go back for them the next month for additional information. So these aren't things I can control, and I can't control a timeline. Just know that we are working on it. But I want to leave you with this. An audit is about history. It's not about current timing. A lot of changes have been made at Tulsa Public Schools. You're the taxpayer, and you're the one writing the check to pay for this. You have a responsibility to determine whether or not it's a wise investment to invest in this new bond issue. I will not weigh in on that, and nor will I let any audit or even talking about an audit decide someone's decision on how to vote. I understand your frustration, and I understand the work that you all have done, but the auditor's office is Switzerland. Our work will be put out when the facts are absolutely indisputable, and we'll work quickly to get those for you. I hope you unlock the doors now.
Yes. Who gets a copy of your audit? How often do you perform that audit? I'm sure Governor Stitt is aware of it. What about the Attorney General? Is he getting involved? Where is the accountability?
Okay. Well, sir, I've been asking that for the 7 years I've been holding this office. So, all audits, whether it's an audit that the state auditor's office performs or whether it's an audit performed by an outside CPA firm on government funds, has to be filed and published on my website. You can go to our website at sai.ok.gov. I'll say that one more time, sai.ok.gov. Or you can Google Oklahoma State Auditor and you'll probably get there as well. All audits are there. Now, because I'm a CPA, and because I have to follow auditing standards, we're always careful to make sure that these reports are issued in the format required by the national generally accepted auditing standards. So it's a lot of legalese. So to make it easier for people like anybody in this room to understand, I put out usually a 7 to 8 page press release that tells this story in layman's terms and then references to the pages in the audit report. Those press releases too are on the website, and if you ever have any trouble finding it, you are welcome to call my office. Unless the lady at the front is gone for lunch, we have a real person who answers our phone, and I'm proud of that. So
I've got Alina, and then we've got Bob, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
okay.
Well,
For your part.
trying to make sure that I understand the fact that there is an addendum to the audit as a private citizen making these decisions. Would it make sense to say I'm going to reserve my vote or my judgment until we actually get the results of the audit before we add on more to the budget? And I guess part two is, if we do decide, if we have this great opportunity to not move forward the budget, and not vote for that budget, will we have another chance after the audit to make adjustments of what the school district actually needs?
No, are you talking about the budget, or are you talking about the bond?
I'm talking about the bond.
Okay, so because you said budget, but I know that Larry was talking about bonds. So she's just saying to withhold her judgment until the findings, the complete findings from the audit is fulfilled. It's not you saying it, it's what she can say.
Is that a possibility as a citizen to do that?
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to even talk about that because the audit's not finished. I really feel like that the auditor's office has to be that one place that you can trust to be solid and factual.
Okay, this is it. Ta-da!
Make it good, Bob.
Well, I've got a couple comments. First of all, I would encourage you to go to our website, sign up for the emails, and get the press releases, because I love reading this school district getting audited or this person getting, and I read her audit reports, and they're pretty informative. So you can see where some city did this or some. It's really, really interesting to read the audit reports. So if you're interested in that stuff, and also if you would go and look at the loft reports from the legislature, and that organization and what they publish too. So those are two good pieces of information where you can see where we've got some financial irregularities. I was just, while this was going on, I was texting a senator and telling him that I was listening to this presentation. As a matter of fact, took a picture of you to send to him. And I said, are you aware? He said, yes. And I said, I'm pretty frustrated. He said, so am I. And what are you going to do about it? And there's been no answer. It's amazing. No answer. Right? There's no answer from him. No. All right. So no answer. So yeah. So no. I'm just going to make a couple comments. Back to the bond. Everybody needs to remember, and I'm just with full disclosure, I've been working on this. I've been on the bond development committee for the school district for the last 14 months. So I've been involved in actually the putting together of this bond. Now, do I agree with all of it? No. Has Ebony and I crossed paths on this deal? Absolutely. I tried to get this thing shrunk down, and I can't. Now, keep in the back of your mind, there are things in this bond that are state mandated, and they've got to get to maintain state accreditation. So
They need to put that separately.
yeah, well, unfortunately, that's not a way a bond is structured, and Rob will tell you that there's four portions to this bond, and you'll see it. It's pretty complicated. But I'm just telling you, you know, I may vote for 3 of the 4. I may vote for 2 of the 4. But you got to look through it and understand what is necessary. So we may need another 9/12 meeting about the bond.
We can do that. Yeah, we can do that. We can definitely
say one more
discuss that.
thing?
Sure, go right ahead,
I just
Cindy.
want to say one more thing. My office this last year put out 353 audits. We're not just sitting around doing nothing. We have so many routine audits that we have to do to keep government moving. The investigative audits just take time. And then I would tell you, Rhonda, thank you for letting me talk about my run for Lieutenant Governor. And then I would say, Byrd's the word for 2026 for Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.